So I forwarded the email over to the Google guys, and I was like, what do you want to do? And they said, all right, we're going to talk about it internally and figure it out. And, we're like biting our nails, waiting for them to get back to us. And finally, they did get back to us, and they said, okay, we discussed it. We're going to go ahead and proceed, but we want to announce it before he does today at 2. So go write up the press release and get it to us as soon as possible.
What's up, everyone? You're tuned in to the Founder Hour. We're your hosts, Pat and Posh, and today we have the great pleasure of hanging out with Brett Crosby. Brett is the co-founder and chief operating officer of PeerStreet. They're a real estate investing company, which I'll let him kind of speak more about. He's also previously the co-founder of Urchin Software Corporation, and some of you, I'm sure, have heard that they were sold to Google and eventually, became known as Google Analytics. So we're really excited to have you on the show and stoked to learn more about your story.
Great. Glad to be here. Yeah. Thanks for coming in.
Awesome.
Yeah, Brett, just to kind of kick it off and let our audience learn a little bit more about your upbringing, are you from LA?
Orange County, which if you're from Orange County, at least when I grew up, you claimed it was not part of LA, but now it's basically one contiguous stretch of
all of SoCal is LA.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just all LA.
In San Diego, they would definitely.
We'll claim San Francisco too. We'll claim all
exactly.
But no, I agree. But so I'm from Orange County. Grew up in Irvine, Woodbridge High School, and then went to USC after that. Lived in LA a short period of time, and then moved to San Diego and started Urchin down there. And I was there for about 9 years in San Diego, and then once Google acquired us, moved up to the Bay Area, and then was there also for just about 9 and change years, and then moved down to LA. So I've been here for about 2 or 3 years now.
Brett, as you're a kid and you're growing up, do you have any idea of, what you want to get into? I mean, was there ever, this dream of I want to become X? Like when I grew up, I wanted to be a firefighter. Yeah. And now I feel like although I don't have the uniform, there's a lot of times that I have to put out fires. So I feel like my childhood dreams have come true.
Yeah.
What was Brett's kind of like childhood dream?
My dream was to be surrounded by women for the rest of my life, and I think I must have wished that at some point. And now I've got a wife, 2 daughters, and a dog that's a woman also. So. It came true.
Okay.
Lesson learned. Be more specific with your asks. No, I'm kidding. But I love my family. Julie is my wife. Kids, Lindy and Lucy. It's amazing.
And they were sending you hearts before.
Shout out to them. They were when you guys walked in. They were sending me these like emoji hearts and all these things. Seriously though, I always wanted to do lots of things, and I think that's actually been reflected in my career. Strangely, which I probably wouldn't have predicted that it would have gone this way, but there was a moment when I was like, I want to be an entrepreneur. And that was like more in college though. I was at the 9.0 at USC. Yep. And one of my buddies who was in business school, he was like, or he's in the business program, not grad school. But in any case, he's like, we have these entrepreneurs that come in, and I think that's a pretty cool path. And I'm like, what's an entrepreneur? And he's like, basically, it's someone who builds up a business and sells it for more than it's worth.
That's a great answer.
And I was like, that sounds fantastic. Yeah. And so I'm like, I want to do that one day. And without knowing much about it, I thought that would be a very good idea.
Yeah, so you were telling us a little bit about it before, but you were an international relations major?
Yeah, international relations and political science. Yep.
Did you have like a path that you were thinking you were going to go down, or was it kind of just, this is interesting, I'll learn about this?
What's interesting is that I think I was like, when I first got to SC, probably like a lot of people that go there, I was interested in the cinema school, got into that a little bit, and I was like, I don't really like this industry. And I mean, I didn't really spend any time. I was just like, I've ended up finding it a little boring when it got on the academic side of it, right? And so then I started, when I got much more serious about school is when I went on semester at sea. You guys familiar with semester at sea? Mm-hmm. Fantastic program. Allowed me to like see the world and like see all these different cultures, but also importantly, it allowed me to reflect back on my own life, where I was headed, and just get outside of my own bubble in a way that I'd never been before, and just think about my own trajectory. And the juxtaposition of the two made me realize, like, you've got to be, or at least this is my internal monologue was, Brett, you've got to be a complete, idiot not to be able to make something yourself with all of the opportunities that we have in the United States in comparison with, I met all these other people that were working super hard and they have no wind at their back. And, to see them working hard and actually trying to scratch out an existence and having this great attitude doing it and being really focused and trying to do those things. And then coming back here where I was kind of like, just kind of cruising, I got much more focused after that and realized it just made me aware of how great the opportunities are and that we have all of this wind at our back. And what I mean by that is like we have roads that generally function and, mail that actually shows up on time and, you can get a loan at a bank and just all of the infrastructure and, stuff that we have available to us. I got much more serious about it. And actually, when I came back from semester at sea, tried to switch into the entrepreneur program. And I was just political science, I think was my major at the time. And I realized that was going to put me out. I was probably going to take another year to graduate.
You just want to get out of there.
And I was like, I don't know if I want to take that financial burden on. So I double majored in international relations. But basically at that point, I was like really thinking about how can I just got very entrepreneurial.
So growing up, did you have anyone in your family that you looked up to that was entrepreneurial and had their own business, or was it a little different?
That's a good question, actually. And so I had two of my uncles were very entrepreneurial, and interestingly, both of these uncles funded us early on with Urchin.
Friends and family.
Yeah, or like rich uncles or some competitor thing called rich uncles. But in any case, Uncle Jerry is, if you're ever in San Diego and you see the Jerome's ads, actually they're in LA now. They're expanded into LA.
I've seen it.
Yeah, if you go into the Staples Center now, it's like
Jerome's it's everywhere. Is it the black and yellow one?
There's like a red logo that says Jerome's. It's like Jerome's Furniture Warehouse. Okay. And now they have the best seat in the house at a lot of games where it's like a lazy boy that you can get upgraded to.
I feel like I've seen it.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen it too somewhere.
Yeah. So you'll hear like once you're kind of tuned into it, you'll hear them and see them everywhere.
We'll see it on the way back, probably.
Yeah, you'll see it everywhere. They sell like mattresses and all this stuff now. And like I was just in San Diego this weekend, and my Uncle Jerry was on TV. We'd just been at his house like, an hour before that. And my kids are like, what's Uncle Jerry doing on TV? And I was like, I told you, Uncle Jerry's famous. So that's Uncle Jerry. And then my other Uncle Chuck, also an entrepreneur, but he was on the biotech side of the world and doing stuff like DNA sequencing devices, like the hardware that was used originally to do like the Human Genome Project and all this stuff. Wow. So really cool stuff. And so, both those guys were always very inspirational to me. One was much more academic and on the science side of it, but the other one was just like kind of old school, hard knocks and just busting it out and like massively successful.
This could be out of order in terms of like the, of this, of your story, but one thing that always fascinates me is, and I think I mentioned the word before, like everybody talks about friends and family. Go to your friends and family first. And, we had a guest on prior who said, I didn't have any friends and family that were, wealthy or even knew about or could fund me anything, Yeah. But for you, what was that conversation like? Or, what was your mindset going into, okay, I'm going to talk to Uncle Jerry and Uncle Chuck, maybe they'll give me something, how'd that go?
Yeah, so fortunately I was doing it with my older brother, Scott,
and this was Urchin?
Is Urchin. Yeah, this is actually pre-Urchin. We were doing a website development company called Web Depot.
This is in college?
Or this is just out of college, yeah.
So you graduate, so you graduate college and then you start this web development firm with your brother.
Yeah, well, interestingly, so my brother and this, our old neighbor who we grew up across the street from since we were like little kids, like 3, I was probably 3 or something. We moved in next to them, maybe younger. I used to chase them around and all this stuff, and but like long-term family friend, literally across the street. He fortunately was a mathematical genius, and like in elementary school, went to high school, and like high school.
All about location.
Exactly. And so those two guys, and then they were doing a website development company. I was just out of college, had like kind of built this website concept where we were going to try and take down the breakdowns, which is how castings are done.
And this is like mid 90s, right?
Yeah, like 95.
Yeah, when
so I was
like
doing
web
that with
development.
one of my fraternity brothers, this guy Austin Harrison, who he went on to become a very successful entrepreneur as well. Very smart guy. In any case, he and I were trying to do that. We were too early. Like that's a completely different tale. But we were using my brother and this guy Paul to build our website, and they were starting this business to do that. So they got Uncle Chuck and Uncle Jerry early involved in that. When I realized we were too early over there, they were like, hey, I kept sending them a bunch of business because everyone's like, where'd you get your website done? Everyone wanted a website done, so I sent them all this business. They said, why don't you join us and help us do this? So I learned to code and build websites, and there was a joke at one point where I was one of the highest paid employees in all of San Diego, and it was because someone would pay us this monthly stipend, but it would take me about 5 minutes to actually do the update. So if you actually applied that throughout the month, it was a very large number. But in truth, it was
not smart
true.
business.
Yeah, but in truth, it wasn't true. I was very low paid. But in any case, so built up. So we were building up that website development company, and we got Uncle Chuck and Jerry kind of involved that way. And when we pivoted, I actually kind of rewrote our business model. When I say rewrote, it was like very lightweight kind of business plan, and said, hey, if we focus on just building software instead, and we'd kind of been building this thing anyway, I was like, if we pivot into that, we can turn this into a much bigger business than building websites. Yeah. Because we knew we had the technical chops and smarts to focus on something and do something much bigger. You're doing websites, you're always building something, it's very good, but then you set it aside. Right. And so that's kind of then we made that transition, recapitalized the business. I became a co-founder of Urchin at that point. We ended up bringing in my another really good friend from USC, one of my best friends, Jack Ancone, and brought him in as the fourth co-founder of Urchin.
So you started Urchin. What did Urchin start as? Like, what was the initial idea? You guys are building websites, and now you're thinking about software. What kind of software? What was like that conversation like?
Well, we had already been building web analytics software, which, by the way, that wasn't even a category or a term back then. It was like, log file analysis or things like that. But we built it because we were building websites, and everyone would say, hey, how do I know if it's successful? And we'd say, well, if people come visit, right? And it was that, and then the other impetus for it, which is interesting, is that bandwidth was really expensive at the time. So it was sort of like getting your mobile phone, if you didn't have like a prepaid plan, you didn't know how expensive your bill was going to be at the end of the month, and to host your website. And in theory, people could see that they got a ton of traffic, and they were going to have to
the more times
turn off their website or something.
The more times your page loaded, the more money you had to spend on it.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. And so we were like, we want you to see, so that when we bill you at the end of the month, it's not a shock. Because we were doing the hosting.
Interesting.
As well.
So that was like the initial reason.
That was the original reason,
point, yeah.
And we just happened to build it in a much smarter way than anyone had done. So it was much more scalable than anything else on the market. And so what that allowed us to do was very important. It allowed us to go after hosting companies. And I think my friend Jack actually came up with this. I've been thinking about this recently. This fishing boat concept, where instead of going after individual customers, we would go after the fishing boats, the guys that had already caught customers. And for us, those were hosting companies. And as we get into the story about what I'm doing today with PeerStreet, that also applies here.
So, Brett, at the time when you guys are building Urchin, as a political science, international relations major, it's not something you learned in college. No. But you did say, you learned how to code and you were familiar with it. But, what was as one of the co-founders, what was the main role that you took on as Urchin was being built?
In the early days of any business, you pretty much have to do almost everything, as you guys, I'm sure, know. Over time, as I specialized in things, we had no product manager. And so basically, there were a few of us who sort of combined that role with our other duties. So I was running marketing and biz dev, but lots of other things too, right? My brother was running sales. Jack was running capital markets and kind of finance, and then later some biz dev stuff too. And he ended up, when we were acquired, he was running biz dev. But lots of us did lots of different things. People kind of traded off. But Paul and I, who was he's the kind of genius that fortunately he wrote the software to be very efficient. He's the one that he and I kind of like would do the product work together. But everyone had input. So I was doing a lot of product work, marketing, press, the whole thing. I would go speak at all the conferences, talk to all the customers, get all the customer feedback, bring them back and say, okay, here's what customers want us to build, and let's figure out how to build that.
At what point do you guys start growing this team, or even, I guess before that, when do you realize that this is a big enough problem that, has a big enough, user base so that we can grow this into more than it is?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, I think, look, we were there in the early days of the web when, every time the web would sort of double and triple and quadruple in size and 10x in size of the number of users and websites and all that stuff. It was very exciting to be a part of that, and especially when you're creating this tool. What was interesting is that it used to be in the kind of early days of the web, it was all about eyeballs and banner ads and things like that. And then the .com bust happened. And by the way, there's like a crazy tale where we almost went out of business during that, but we survived. And it turned out that web analytics are actually sort of counter-cyclical because all of a sudden people care a lot more about where they're spending money, and they need to know
more data,
what traffic is bringing them value and what isn't, and they cut that out from the marketing spend. So all of a sudden web analytics became very important. Interestingly, Google had a bit of that as well because they were a huge beneficiary of the .com bust, with people caring about where people spend on ad dollars and making sure it converted, and AdWords converted extremely well. So all of a sudden there was a huge paradigm shift, and they were huge beneficiaries.
What was your initial strategy for bringing on clients? Because I mean, at that point, people are just getting into building websites, whether you're a company or you're an individual person. Like, what was that conversation like trying to get them to use your platform?
Yeah, I mean, it's a conversation that shifted over the 9 years we did it. In the early days, we would just try to explain to them, like, you built this website. Do you know if anyone's even visiting it, or things like, et cetera. But to be honest, we weren't great individual salespeople, we didn't want to be enterprise sales. So we were more about like partnering and growing with our partners, like web hosting companies.
And was it a subscription, or was it like a hard disk type of thing?
We had we didn't do hard disk stuff, but we did always kind of flirt with the idea of doing a boxed software thing, even though we knew that was going to go away over time. It was still very popular and an easy way to sell software. You could go to our website, buy it, and like download it is the main way.
Got it.
We like to transact. Or we would do a big deal with a hosting company and let them install it.
And as far as the timeline, this is like what, late 90s?
Yeah, there's like late 90s, like 97, 99 through kind of like 99, and then 2000, 2001 .com bust. We almost went out of business. And then, it was actually with 9/11 was like literally 9/11. There's a crazy story where we were supposed to we were supposed to fund on the day of 9/11. And I woke up to my friend calling me. Jack called me and he said, turn on the TV. And I did. And I was like, whoa, what does this mean? Do you think this meeting's happening? And he's like, no. I mean, obviously we're concerned about everything else, but I'm kind of just cutting to the chase on this. But so aside from all the other calamity and horrible things that happened on that day, one of the results is that we, one of the guys who flew out from Boston the day before to sign the check in person with us, and sign the deal and actually like give us our Series A check, is like, meeting's off, and we're reserving capital only for companies we've already invested in. Sorry, but the deal was completely paper,
because it was just like unexpected. Like they didn't know what to expect for the next X
the
amount
whole
of years.
world changed that day, obviously in a massive way. So, and we had to like cut our staff, and we almost went out of business. I took no salary for like 6 months after that. My brother did the same thing.
I mean, I guess it's an obvious question, but I mean, I'm just interested into kind of seeing, obviously, we focus on the founder story, but like as a founder, what is that feeling like, where you've built up this company for, at least a couple to few years at this point, you have a team of people that essentially kind of entrusts you with, I mean, it's their livelihood, really. Sure. What's that feeling like as a founder, to go through that? Obviously, it's out of your control in this situation, but
yeah, it's very hard. So, I mean, just to the first part of your point, like just hiring people and taking on their livelihood, they're quitting their other job to go work with you. Your first time doing that, that's hard. And I think the sooner you get comfortable with it, the better, because you can actually scale up your business. We were probably a little too conservative because none of us had ever done it before back then.
Yeah.
I'm much more comfortable with it now, but also because I'm more comfortable with understanding how to scope the size of the opportunity and the making sure the business is well capitalized so that we can afford to have employees and all of those things. That's not to say though that look, if the world changes again, it
Right.
turns on a dime, like
That's out of your
all
control.
bets are off, right? So,
Yeah.
and I think people recognize that. But look, I do take that with me. I've had to do layoffs in very hard times like that, and it's very, very hard. I mean, you come out of that crying many times and very shaken, and but it's also one of those things you go through it with people, and it's an incredible bonding experience as well, especially once you dig your way out of it and create a successful business out of it. You also tend to learn, you tend to go much deeper on your business and make sure that you're matching, income with your expenditures and things like that. So we did a lot to rethink our business models. We took like 30-page agreements made them like on a single sheet of paper, front and back. And we became a much easier business to work with as a result of that. So I do think some good things, there are silver linings in those situations. And if you are able to survive to find them, then you can ride those and really kind of change the way you operate as a company. And I think, by the way, a little interesting anecdote is that had we raised that Series A from those investors that we were working with, then they wanted us to move to the enterprise, where we would have been like a total Me Too, and just like there were several other analytics companies in the enterprise at that time. Instead, we went the opposite direction, which is to say very light on professional services, much less expensive, but still very high quality software, just much more self-service software. And so the tools ended up being very similar, but our approach was very different. And so later, we became a much better fit for Google to acquire, and became much more strategic to them because we ended up having a very large user base, and that they were looking at their AdWords customers, going like, "What the heck? Like 15% of our AdWords customers are using Urchin, and like some marginal percentage are using all these other tools. What is this Urchin thing telling, like potentially intermediating us from our customer decision-making process, whether they're going to keep reinvesting in AdWords?" And so, again, you never know how those like weird parts of your history will affect some future purchase. And like, had we taken that Series A capital back then, we may have never would have done Google Analytics later on.
So you're running this company for about 9 years. And you survive the market crash, and you come out of it alive, and you, like you said, it kind of worked out in a way where you were a better fit to get approached by Google, which was at the time still a big company as they are now. You have a funny story about that. Tell us how that acquisition happened and how you found out about it.
Yeah, so the acquisition is interesting. There's all these other, again, like the kind of arc of history is just wild. Like the guys who walked up to me we were at Search Engine Strategies in 2004, which was this like the kind of show to be at for people in anything to do with search engine optimization, advertising online, all that stuff. And I had created a pretty big presence for us at that show. I brought a good chunk of our team, all the kind of key decision makers, plus a lot of engineers, and just because I'd been going to these shows and talking to customers, and I kept bringing back, here's what customers want. And that show was really, really good for just learning what the ecosystem wanted, where it's going, how do we get ahead of it, et cetera. And we had just launched, fortunately, at that show, an on-demand version, which was where you could just basically install a pixel on your webpage. You didn't have to do the whole like install software on your server, which was a big innovation for us at the time. And that's how Google Analytics works today. So had we not launched that, a lot of other things wouldn't have happened. But while we were at that show, Wesley Chan and David Friedberg walked up to me at the trade show booth and said,
who are these guys?
So they said, hey, we're interested in hearing about, we hear good things about you and about your company. We're interested in hearing about it. And I look at their badges and it says Google, and I said, okay, great. I'm happy to tell you, as long as you're not part of the conversion tracking team, which was like this product that Google had at the time.
It's like a competitor of yours?
Somewhat competitive, exactly. So I was like, because it's sort of competitive. And they're like, oh, no, we're not. It's fine. Go ahead, tell us. And fortunately, Wesley was lying through his teeth at that point, because then I told them all about it, and they were like, awesome, we'd love to explore a business partnership with you guys, like a business development sort of thing. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, I'm like, that is just code for we would like to explore buying you guys, but we want to like
be a little soft about it.
Be a little soft about it, exactly. And so it turns out what they were is Wesley was the product manager. Your question, Wesley was the product manager on conversion tracking, and Dave Friedberg was he was corp dev, and Wesley's sort of partner on that. He was not head of corp dev. He was actually 24 at the time, and just had he'd been at Google for a little bit.
And how old are you at the time?
I was probably 32.
Okay.
And so here's this 24-year-old that ends up like determining the fate of our whole business.
Right.
Fortunately, and the reason I mentioned both of these guys so prominently is that Wesley went on to do a whole bunch of really interesting stuff in his career. He went on to Google Ventures and made a bunch of really key investments there early on. He went to Google Ventures. He did a bunch of other stuff at Google as well, but now he's at Felicis Ventures, and Felicis is an investor in PeerStreet. Dave Friedberg he left Google about a year and a half after they acquired us, and I was like, what the hell? You just acquired us and said, like, come here. It's great. Come on in. The water's fine. And then I'm out. And he's like, no, but I got this startup. I got this idea I got to go do. And he went and built this company called Climate Corporation that he ended up selling to Monsanto for $1.1 billion. And then he also did, he conceived of Metromile and built that business. You're familiar with Metromile? Pay by the mile auto insurance?
Insurance, yeah. I get their ads all the time on Instagram.
Yeah. Oh, really?
It's like they know I drive a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I do.
I use them. They're fantastic.
They do? Okay.
I'm also an investor. I was an investor in Climate Corp, an investor
cool.
in Metromile, just to full disclosure. But I love Metromile. I use it in all of our vehicles, which is not a lot, but got a few cars. And some that we don't use that much, which it's perfect for.
Right.
Anyway. And then he also went on to create Eatsa, which is like a vegetarian fast food restaurant it's quinoa based up in San Francisco and a few other places. But the key thing about that business, and they've raised a ton of money at these ridiculous valuations, is that the whole back end, the whole front end is fully automated. So it's like all iPads and stuff. And there's one employee that works.
Just eliminating all the minimum wage has no impact on him.
Right. And so like the whole front end of the restaurant has been automated. One employee just to kind of like make sure if anything goes wrong, et cetera. And then the whole back end is now getting automated too.
So there's nobody cooking.
So nobody's cooking. What they're doing is like a hub and spoke model where it's like a central restaurant, whatever. That's a long story, but both those guys have been massively successful and gone on to do all these other awesome things. So it was great to get to meet them early on in their careers and have their, influence on what we were doing at Google. But yeah, I feel like there was another part we were...
Yeah, the main part.
Talking about your wedding day.
Oh, yeah, that whole story. Yeah, so those guys walk
the most important day of your life. Come on.
That's true.
Literally.
That is true.
In two ways.
In many ways. So what happened is, when you're doing a startup, especially back then, there was no back then there was not like it is now where it's like, hey, you tried to do a startup and you failed. Great job. We'll fund your next effort, right? Like, keep going.
Yeah.
Back then, it was like, I was just out of college, and then all of a sudden doing startup, and we did it for almost a decade. And like, if it didn't work, we had no like bankable sort of skills or like bankable anything for that time. You were basically fucked, right? And so like literally, I was like, what am I gonna do? Be a bartender or like bag groceries? I don't know, right? And so. It definitely weighed on me in the idea of like getting married and like potentially raising a family and all that stuff. So it was hard because I had met my wife in Cabo in a spring break thing, but then we never started dating at all. And then after SC, I saw her at Homecoming in the 90, and then
she went to SC as well.
She went to SC as well, and then we ended up starting to date and kind of a long distance relationship thing. Eventually she moved to San Diego, and it took me like 7 years of dating before I was ready to get engaged. But it was all because I was like, I don't know if I can even support myself, let alone anyone else, right? Yeah. And so once Google approached us and was going to acquire us, I was like, sweet. Like now I feel comfortable pulling the trigger because all that time is bankable and then everything else, right? And so we end up getting engaged, but the Google deal ends up taking like 9 months. And so, but I didn't know how long it was going to take. We kept thinking it was like going to close any day now. And so I get engaged and all this like it's getting closer to the wedding.
Here you are swiping the credit card, and you're like,
Yeah,
you don't even
we're
know
like,
what's going on.
exactly.
Is this happening? Is it not?
We're like 2 weeks out from the wedding, and Google had told us, look, if the deal leaks, we're walking. We don't care what phase, and that was just a policy thing so that you're not out there shopping their deal, basically. And so we're like, yeah, we won't leak it. Anyway, I get out of the shower one morning, about to head to work, and I get a voicemail and an email at the same. I'm like checking my email while I'm listening to a voicemail. John is like, hey, this is John Battelle. I heard you guys are selling to Google. I'm going to write about it today at 2:00. Would you call me back if you want to put a quote?
So you just have a fucking heart attack.
Full heart attack. I'm like, oh my God, we've been negotiating this for almost 9 months, and like I'm about to get married. Like this is not good. So I forwarded the email over to the Google guys, and I was like, what do you want to do? And they said, all right, we're going to talk about it internally and figure it out. And, we're like biting our nails, waiting for them to get back to us. And finally, they did get back to us, and they said, okay, we discussed it. We're going to go ahead and proceed, but we want to announce it before he does today at 2. So go write up the press release and get it to us as soon as possible. So we actually went, my brother and I went, and we're like, why do we...
How did this guy find out?
It was we had hired someone to help us get the deal done, an investment banker, and they pitched the same client twice. In one of the meetings, they said, oh, we're selling this company called Urchin. In the other meeting, they said, hey, we're selling this web analytics business to Google. And the person
Put two and two
was
together.
able to put 2 and 2 together and figure it out.
Wow.
Yeah. So in any case, that's what we think happened anyway.
We'll go with that.
Yeah. And so anyway, they came back and said, cool, you guys, we'll be the ones to announce. We put the press release out, and then we were just like, woo, like sweet. And then 2 weeks later, and by the way, like up until that point, none of our, like maybe a couple of our employees knew. They knew something was going on, but they didn't know what. And so it was like, oh, by the way, in 2 weeks, we're selling to Google. And we're all moving up to Mountain View from San Diego.
They wanted to keep the whole team.
Basically the whole team. There were a few people that were like, nah, I have a family here. I'm going to stay here. There's like, a couple of people stayed. But for the most part, the whole company moved up with their families. Like it was a substantial move. And awesome, like one of our sales guys put it. There's still more to this story, but like as our sales guy said, it was like doing AAA ball and playing AAA ball and having the Yankees call and say, hey, we're playing the World Series. Do you guys know how to pitch? And he was like, yeah, we know how to pitch. Yeah. So it was super cool. And then, so we announced it, and then fast forward to my wedding day, in my tuxedo, surrounded by my groomsmen, drinking a Pacifico, and in comes my co-founder, Paul, and with his like telephone book of an agreement, and he slaps it down in front of me, and he's like, Brett, you got to sign this thing. And I was like, Paul, I'm walking down the aisle in 10 minutes. I can't read this. He's like, dude, you've read it. You know it's in there. You're going on your honeymoon tomorrow, right? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, I think we're getting the deal done tomorrow or the next day, so you got to sign now. And if it changes, we'll just use your signature page. Yeah. I was like, okay, fine, but like you better not be Zuckerberging me out of all my shares right now because
yeah, I mean, just like you're signing your life away, basically.
Yeah, like the one thing you don't want to do is like sign an agreement like that when you haven't read it. But anyway, fortunately, Paul is an upstanding guy and did not do that. So I'm like, you guys are witnesses to my groomsmen and signed. And then 10 minutes later, walked down the aisle and
just big smile on your face.
Sold everything that
because
day,
you were getting married, not because you sold your
company. Yeah,
of course. Yeah, that's a no-brainer.
And so it made for a great wedding and a big party. everyone celebrated.
Wow,
mightily. Yeah, it was good. And then I went on my honeymoon, and then all my everyone else actually started while I was on my honeymoon. I was only gone for a week, but it was like that fast.
And they started moving up already.
Yeah, but it was like show up Monday morning. Wow. Like you guys are starting.
So it's
Monday.
kind of a blessing that guy called you and said, in a way, like, I know about this, I'm going to write about it because it kind of sped up the process and
I don't know if it
became real.
I don't know if it sped it up. I think part of it was, I think there were two things. One, when he did that, we had just negotiated the final point, and it was like, all right, we'll just write that up. I think that's part of the reason it proceeded.
Got it.
But what I didn't find out until years later, I actually spoke at Stanford and to this entrepreneur class that I didn't think was going to be a big deal, but it turns out they create a podcast and syndicate it out.
Sam Altman
startup?
It's not Sam Altman's. It's the E-Corner, and it's Tom Byers who does it.
Right.
Who's brother of Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield and Byers. And also Blake Byers, who's at Google Ventures now. It's his uncle. But in any case, and then it turned out all these other like full luminaries spoke in that thing, like Marissa Mayer, and I think maybe Larry did, and Zuckerberg, and all these people. So.
Anyway, and Brett Crosby.
And me, of course. It's just right in there. But when I spoke at that, I went out and some people at Google heard it, and one of them reached out and was like, I don't know if you know the backstory on that. When we were making that decision, like we almost did not proceed. Like we almost just cut it just to establish a precedent that you don't leak deals. But we decided to proceed.
Basically, we fucking wanted you.
Yeah, they really needed you.
And
I guess
we were going to get you.
I guess, but also like it could have gone the other way really easily.
Right.
You know?
It was a good day for them.
So
They felt
was
good.
bad. And especially because we knew, this is the other thing, they don't do this anymore, but back then they were like, here's the strategy and here's what we're going to do once we integrate you. They had us like brainstorm the strategy and all this stuff. Now it's like, it's kind of church and state. Like you don't really talk about post-acquisition integrations. Back then we knew what we were going to do. The strategy was to like rename it, give it away for free, integrate with AdWords, integrate with AdSense, do all this stuff. And so we were like, oh, if they don't acquire us, like we know we're hosed. Because like we don't want to compete against free. So
I feel like whenever you kind of talk to an entrepreneur about like the differences between starting a company and sort of building a startup and working at a big corporation, it's always like the corporations are evil and it's like a huge, political organization and I don't want to work there. And here you are like going from like I don't know how many people you were at the time at Urchin. Was it?
We were at that time. We were like 35. We'd been up
35.
to 60 before, and then a lot of that was in Japan randomly. But
So now you're going to like Google, right?
Yeah.
How was that transition like?
It was amazing. It was like going to some sort of promised land of startup life. Like it was
You already burned out. You're like, I'm ready to just hang out and.
No, I mean, look, we had all these. We had milestones, and like it was 25. Google was about 2,500 people back then. It wasn't. It was not a place where you go to just get lost. It was a place you go to just kick ass and work really hard and try and, as naive as it may sound now to say, but like really change the world and improve the world, People believed they were doing that back then, like very earnestly. So it was a really neat place to be. Yeah.
How long were you there?
Just shy of 10 years. Yeah.
How was, I guess going off that transition question, but how was it like being like, the guy running the show technically with Urchin to still running the show in this, with this product, but being under this, at that point, 2,500 is still big, but like under a big company with several products.
It was fascinating. We did not go up there with a lot of ego thinking that we were some sort of, hotshots or anything. It was really the opposite. We felt very lucky to be there. We felt like we had slid in the back door because none of us went to MIT and all that. You know what I mean? Like really smart people there and very highly pedigreed and et cetera. So we went in there thinking like, hey, this is a place where we can learn a ton and it's going to be an amazing experience. And it was, and we did learn a ton. But one thing I also thought is like, wow, I'm going to learn from all these professional people on how to do product marketing and all this stuff. And Google didn't really have its act together in some of those areas as much as I would have expected. But it was because they went from a very small startup to a very fast-growing startup, and like they were learning it as they went. So it was really. I always found it fascinating to see the areas where they hadn't really built out that kind of infrastructure within the company, and you could see that stuff even at that stage of that business. But that's what made it even that much more exciting to be in because you're like, wow, I can actually contribute something to this business and not just sort of learn from them. And so then once I felt that, then it was like really exciting because I could dig in and start offering ideas and suggestions and build out new things. And,
And did you do that?
I did. And so like we did, I worked with the product manager on Website Optimizer and like we tried to build multivariate testing and A/B testing tools. And we were just thinking like, what are the other things that are adjacent to web analytics that we can build out, integrate with? And then I started getting advice from my manager, like, hey, look outside of that. Like, look at local ads and mobile ads. These are big strategic initiatives for the company and potential really new big areas that I want to put you in charge of these things. And I was like, I don't have any experience with that stuff. And they're like, who cares? Did you have experience with web analytics before you started that? I was like, no. Like, no one had ever. So I think in part of that and growing in and doing those things, and then we acquired AdMob, and like AdMob was a $700 million acquisition. We became very big in the mobile advertising space, but had to teach the rest of the market about it and figure it out ourselves. What I learned is that I could go into lots of different areas and just kind of figure it out as I went. And so over time, I got much more comfortable with that. And I think actually going back to your first question about, my early days as a kid, what did I want to do? I wanted to do lots of things. And that I ended up getting very comfortable with just jumping into businesses I knew almost nothing about or that didn't exist yet, and figuring them out and kind of like coming up with a plan.
You bring up an interesting point because it's like, when it comes to especially highly technical industries or companies, what do you think for you in particular? Like you said, you didn't really know too much about the technicalities, and I know your co-founder was kind of the math genius that kind of built it, but still, like, what do you think set yourself apart and set yourself up for success compared to another company that might have been doing the same thing at the same time?
In the web analytics space
that maybe like knew more about it or like was kind of had more experience.
There were definitely guys that were out there further ahead of us and considered, we were not considered the top tier player at the time by a lot of analysts. But what made us really unique is that they were focused on a very specific paradigm and business model, and we had done something very different. And theirs was basically enterprise sales. They were going after individual companies, trying to charge them a lot for the individual software piece, and then all these professional services, and create, like using it, sucking onto one customer as a cash cow. Yeah. We kind of took the Guy Kawasaki approach of, when he was doing Garage.com way back then and writing books like how to drive your how to drive the competition crazy. And we were trying to apply those lessons to this space and say, let's do something very different. And instead of very expensive, let's go low price and go for as many users as we can. Yeah. Because we knew everyone out there, whether they were the largest website in the world to the smallest person with like a GeoCities account, which was like a
I remember that.
Yeah, that everyone cared to know if people were visiting their website and like what pages they were looking at.
I remember those little website trackers at the bottom that showed.
Exactly. Yeah, that was like early website story stuff. Was doing those things. But in any case, so we just had a little bit different take. And my brother would always say things like, "It's the wow thing. It's the word of web." I don't know why I coined that strange term, but it was like really just kind of like your reputation and like getting the word out there is the most powerful marketing you can do, and just having people talk about you. And that ended up being quite true.
Wow. So you're at Google for 10 years, and then did you leave to start PeerStreet?
Yeah, so I was at Google for 10 years, and before I left, I was running Chrome, Gmail, Docs, Drive, global product marketing, and growth. And
this is like from launching the products to
Chrome? No, I was not on Chrome and Gmail or Docs from the inception. I got there I had been on social, and right when I got social successfully launched and landed, and I was like, okay, I'm off this project because I was like committed there, and like a lot of really good people left. It was a great project to be on because they pulled so many smart people that I got to work with, guys like Max Levchin and Rob Spiro, all these guys who went on to do all these amazing things. But and there were dozens and dozens of others like that. But a lot of people left because it was a crazy kind of shit show of
Is this social as in Google Plus?
Yeah, Google Plus, plus one button.
You don't want to say the name, but
there's like a ton. Well, I say social because there's so many things. Right. Like even the universal look and feel of Google, which everyone takes for granted now, was a part of that. The thing that they called Sandbar internally, which is like that all the links at the tops of all the pages basically are universal and the same. There was just a whole bunch of things. Like universal terms of service we rolled out. Before that, every product had their own unique term of service per product.
If you only knew you had to just launch stories on Google, it would have been a whole different experience. But
I actually think Google has a huge opportunity in social right now because the whole the space is so upended again. Yep. But in any case, and then I left that and went to work on the launch of Google Drive, and that was pre-Drive launch, and I helped launch that. Of course, Scott Johnston, who's the product manager, I think he still is on it. Very smart guy. And great team. And then as I did that, I took on Docs and Gmail. And then someone else had the full-time job of global growth and marketing on Chrome, and she went on maternity. And she's like, Brett, I need you to. She used to work for me on mobile ads a long time ago, and she had this great career. And she was like, hey, I'm going on maternity leave. You're the only person I trust to like take this over and then give it back to me when I get back. And I was like, I can't do it. That's a full-time job. I got this job. And she's like, you can just do it. And I'm like, okay, fine. So I took on her job too. And then she came back and she's like, oh, I'm coming back. I was like, sweet. I'm ready to give you this back. And she's like, oh, but I'm going to Google X. And so, she's like, you're stuck with it.
Oh, God.
Great. So anyway, I did that, and it was actually ended up being fine and a lot of fun. Worked closely with like guys like Sundar, who became Google CEO now, et cetera. And then everything was going swimmingly. I loved Google, and then my co-founder for PeerStreet. Well, let me put it this way: my old buddy from college from USC reached out and said, "Hey, I have this idea. I want to sit down and tell you about it, and basically, I want you to be my co-founder." And I was like, "Well, that's not going to happen, but let me learn about the business, et cetera." And after several conversations, I was like, "Well, maybe I will do this."
Yeah. So this is Brew
Johnson.
Brew Johnson.
Yeah.
And what was he doing at the time?
So Brew, basically, long story short, he was a real estate attorney. He got obsessed with what was driving the growth in real estate prices, and it led him to securitization. And he was like, "This is not going to end well." He like got obsessed with all of the details of it, and he was like, people are not paying attention in this, and this is going to end badly. And so he kind of was like had this Big Short sort of mind frame.
Yeah.
And,
This is pre-market crash or
pre-market crash, like as early as 2004. He like had his
Wow.
girlfriend at the time, is now his wife, sell her condo, and he was like, as he puts it, he was not fun to have at cocktail parties because he was always saying like the sky is going to fall very soon. And sure enough, it fell. But by then he had quit the law, and his brother had said, "Hey, help me with my startup that is going very well." He did, but he fortunately he had this outlook and this insight because he told his brother, like, you need to start taking these calls from acquirers who are trying to buy your company. Because his brother was just like blowing him off. He's like, "Nah, we're just going to keep growing this thing. It's great." And so he ends up convincing his brother to sell to Expedia, which they do 1 week before Lehman goes under.
Amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. So really lucky timing on his part. And so his brother did incredibly well. And so Brew the whole time is going
So he saw the future. Like he just,
yeah. And so he was like, but he was also thinking about, how many people got hurt in that, and like, hey, how can you prevent the next crisis? Like when it comes to real estate, and how do you build a smarter model than the whole system that's there today? And so he started thinking about how to build PeerStreet, and basically he had a concept for what he wanted to build. And in 2013, a whole bunch of stars aligned. The main thing is that the Jobs Act passed, which made crowdfunding legal. And so all of a sudden it was much easier to do. The regulatory barriers for building this business, the environment just got much better for it. Number one. Number two, the technology had come a long way. And then the third thing is that there was kind of general market acceptance because of companies like Lending Club and Prosper.
So you said originally this is like 2004. He's kind of forecasting, what the real estate market's going to look like. Yeah. But it takes 9 years to, I guess, kind of come up with this idea, like, or fully, or I mean, what took so long for him to start it up?
So he didn't leave the law until I think 2006, and helped his brother, and they sold that business in
right before 08, 09.
Yeah.
And then
and that's when it happened. So
yeah, and then he was on at Expedia, like helping integrate that business.
Got you.
And then he ended up leaving there and was going to do some other things, and then all of a sudden, Jobs Act came along, and he's like, "Wow, now it like makes sense to do this." So he put a business plan together, and he's like, "Hey, I need you to get involved in this thing." And so I was like one of the first people he talked to about it. And really, it was an industry that I knew very little about, and so I had to get educated as quickly as I could.
Seems like a common theme.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the thing.
It's not a knock on you. I think it's in fact more so complimentary in terms of like, and I think it's something that I think a lot of our listeners should also take away from is like a lot of the stories that we hear. Like, you don't really need to be an expert at anything to start it out. You just kind of have to like. You just got to do it, number one.
Yeah.
But you got to just learn, and just learn as you go, and just build as you go.
Absolutely. There's a lot of learning as you go, but in this business, like without Brew, like he had this unique insight. He understood the legal ramifications. He had been around technology enough to kind of be dangerous to know how that whole thing worked. And so I just don't think there are a lot of people that could figure out how to put this together. And in fact, if you look at the way our business is put together, even still, no one is approaching this space the way we are.
Yeah, it's pretty niche. Like it's like the whole concept. And I guess it's a good kind of segue into like what PeerStreet is and how what it does. Give us a little background on that.
Yeah. So just real quickly before we move off that, I agree. Like I am a big fan of like jumping into things and obviously, like, I think most people, if Brew approached them, would just be like, I don't know anything about this space.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And that was kind of my initial, like, this is a really big, potentially very massive idea, but I don't.
Yeah,
have
but like you
I
left
don't have the
your
expertise
job
to-
at Google for 10 years,
Right,
to,
exactly,
To do
that
this.
I
It's a big
worked
risk,
to
and especially
build
at that
up
time in
and-
your life when you I'm sure you had kids or
Exactly.
starting to have kids.
Kids and yeah.
Yeah.
So it took a lot of thinking for me to do it, but part of what got me to do it was actually I took the idea to Michael Burry, who's the guy. He is the guy from The Big Short, right? He was played by Christian Bale in the movie.
Yeah.
And we went to the real Michael Burry, and long story short, he was like, I don't want to advise you guys. I want to invest in this business. Because I was like, I just wanted his blessing that was a good idea. And he was like, this is a great idea, and you guys have the potential to disrupt the whole thing and actually do something very meaningful for a lot of people.
This is before you even launched the product?
This is before we launched. We just brought
and
up
you
the
already
idea,
secured an
like a
investment,
pitch
so
deck,
you're
and-
yeah. So there you go. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. And so I knew I was an investor in this business that Michael Burry had also invested in, so we were able to access him. But that was part of my due diligence, was going to people that actually did understand the space.
I
and
mean, who better to go to? Yeah.
Exactly, at
Yeah.
a very deep level. Also, I asked Brew, who's like the smartest guy in the world, who you would want involved, and he's like, Michael Burry. I was like, okay. I'm like, I think I'm an investor in the same company as him. So I went and figured it out, and sure enough. So that gave me a lot of confidence that it was in fact a good idea. And then the more I got into it, what I didn't realize is like how hard this business was to start. And so let me tell you what it is, and then I can explain that. Because this is a business with a really hard, it's got a very hard kind of chicken and egg cold start problem. So what it is a two-sided marketplace. Basically, PeerStreet's a platform for investing in real estate debt. And you talk about niche earlier when you were describing it, which is true. We kind of found a niche to start this business in, but the real estate debt
is not so
industry is one of the largest industries, the largest financial markets on the planet. But the interesting thing about it is it's completely inaccessible to most investors as a direct investment. So if you imagine the kind of analog to this would be like the U.S. equities market, like stocks.
Yeah.
And in this case, imagine there's no stock market, there's no New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, any of that. There's no E-Trade, no Schwab, no way to directly invest. And so how could you do it? You could go call a company and say, hey, I want to invest like $5,000 in Ford. And Ford's like, what? No. Or you would probably invest in some mutual fund or some weird thing that had access to it. And that's kind of how you invest in real estate debt today. You invest in these like tranches of massive pools and very strange derivatives and all that stuff. So the concept behind PeerStreet is like, hey, let's allow people to much more directly invest and connect investors much more closely with the borrowers. And so we created this marketplace, like a two-sided market, where on one side we work with investors who want access to real estate debt as an investment. And most people don't even know you can invest in real estate.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean,
like
what is that?
Most people know you can invest in real estate,
Right,
but not real estate debt. And
So is that like someone who has a mortgage, for example?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're investing in the mortgage side. But where we're starting, the niche actually where we're starting is in the short-term real estate debt. These are short-term bridge loans, typically for like real estate entrepreneurs, like fix and flippers, or people that are going to buy a property, fix it up, and put a tenant in it. There's this whole space out there that is not served by banks. It turns out actually a pretty large space that's not served by banks. And so what we're doing is we partner with those guys, those lenders out there that are servicing that industry, and we have created a secondary market for them where we will vet the lenders, vet each of their loan that they submit to the platform, and if we like it, then we'll actually purchase it. And we use a bunch of data and technology to do that, as well as like some manual processes to make sure we are comfortable with what we're buying, and then we put it up for investors on the other side.
Wow.
Yeah. So which is really interesting. And so that's what the business is today, and that's where we started. Really hard cold start problem. Because you're like, hey, investors, we're going to have this asset. And then lenders, we'll have investors here eventually. And, so it was like...
Yeah, you're basically pitching this idea to two parties that are not really familiar with this concept of like being bridged.
Right.
And expecting that it might work.
Yeah. And fortunately, we had something to point to, which is the whole Fannie Mae system.
Yeah.
That's how banks work today. Like if you get a mortgage right now, like 99 times out of 100, your bank is going to instantly sell that mortgage to the secondary markets, which are Fannie and Freddie. Then it gets pooled and tranched and all that stuff. Interestingly, you subsidize those banks on the front end by depositing your money there, and you get nothing in return for it. And they're using it to create mortgages and then sell them off. And then you end up buying those mortgages back in these tranche pools through your 401k.
Quick side story. I have a few trigger words, and Fannie and Freddie are one of them, two of them, because I had invested in both Fannie and Freddie stock. Like this is like.
Are those your safe words, like in a sex word?
No.
What are we talking about there?
Definitely not.
Clarify.
Definitely not. No, definitely not. It drives me nuts because it was like 2013ish. I had just turned 20. I was like around 21 years old, and I had invested both in Fannie and Freddie in their stock, and it had gone up like tremendously at that point. And so it was my 21st birthday. I was like, wow, this is amazing. A week after that, I'm going to school, and I'm just checking my Apple stocks app. And I just see it's just dropping, it just keeps dropping. And I'm like, fuck, I can't remember my damn password to the Scottrade account. And so literally everything I had made, not only did I lose like what I had made, I'd lost more money on it. So I hate Freddie and Fannie. My best friend works at Freddie now. But yeah, like,
it's funny.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So
he'll appreciate
not funny
it.
that you had the loss, but it's funny your best friend.
No, it's funny now too. But yeah,
I want to stay on this topic, but I think it's really interesting because like, kind of going back to you leaving Google to start this company, like you're kind of in years into your career, and you're leaving kind of like a sort of safe job at Google, obviously at that time especially, to start this brand new company that you don't know much about, and it's kind of like an industry that, I mean, from what I'm hearing, didn't really exist. You kind of figured out like a little pocket to kind of go into and create something out of.
Yeah.
Like, what is going through your mind? Like, why did you do this? Was it just because your best friend came to you and said, "Hey, let's do this," or was there something else?
Partly because I trusted Brew, and I knew I've always known Brew's very, very smart, and he's got a name like Brew, and he comes across as this jolly, gregarious guy. So I think a lot of people underestimate him, but he's actually incredibly smart, like ridiculous, like photographic memory kind of guy. And I've known that about him for a long time. That just he's like actually super, super smart when you get to know him, and the more he was talking about it, the more I could see that he had seen this from all angles. And not only did he, and it's hard to articulate this business. So he wasn't like, "Hey, Brett, here's the roadmap of exactly how it goes." But the way he was describing it, it was like, "This is messed up, and we could solve this," and you know what I mean.
There's a lot of problems.
So many problems, and it was really a question of where do you start, and how do you, and at what point in the life cycle of the business would you actually be able to address those problems? And that was not entirely clear, and still it's not entirely clear, right? But I have a much better sense now. And what it looks like, the way I pitch the business, or to kind of describe it today even, is we're basically like a Fannie Mae for all the stuff that falls outside of Fannie Mae, which is a very large, is about $700 billion industry annually. And that whole industry is super undercapitalized, because if you think about banks before they had Fannie and Freddie, they could only make loans with the capital that they had, and then they had to sit on those to term or get more depositor capital before they could make more loans, right? So they were very capital constrained themselves. Fannie and Freddie changed that because they created liquidity, and so banks were no longer capital constrained. It did some very positive things. It created, and basically what that is, more borrowers had access to more capital, more people could live the American dream, all that stuff. Great. And it also created a good investment for investors for a long time, until like everyone stopped paying attention to what they were doing, and like the market went crazy in 2008 happened. But a lot of the concepts were good. But if you built Fannie and Freddie today, you would never build them the way they are done. It's crazy how that is incredibly opaque, convoluted, and just nuts. So you would never build that today. And that's why no one's trying to disrupt that industry, because it's like, where do you start? Well, we found a place to start, and we're building basically the Fannie and Freddie outside of that. We think over time, as we build this business and using modern day technology, actual data and analytics, and just smarter, like a marketplace approach and all this stuff, where much more of what a borrower pays actually gets to the end investor than it does in the Fannie and Freddie system, where like 50 to 90% of the yield is actually stripped out before it gets to the end investor. We think over time, not only can we fill in and create a massive business just in the space that they don't occupy, and we should be able to grow that space, but long term, we think we could actually be quite competitive.
And for the investors, is this, I'm making an assumption, but I'm assuming this is more of a long-term investment for them. But at the same time, you also said that a lot of these are like, buy and sell type, buy, flip type properties.
Yeah.
What's the benefit to the investor? I mean, is it a short-term investment that they're trying to make and just make quick money on?
Yeah.
Is it just some guy that's, has made money and just wants to just save?
By the way, if I'm pitching like a retail person, what I just gave you as a pitch is like the worst pitch I could give.
For-
That's
yeah,
not what
I
I'm
know,
doing.
I know,
I was
for
trying
sure.
to give you like a
The
kind
bigger
of
picture,
three-dimensional
right, yeah.
concept of the business.
Yeah, yeah.
And like when you're working in a space this big, you kind of have to think in 3D because you can't
Mm-hmm.
think about where the business is when it started or where it is
Right.
at any given moment in time. You kind of have to think about the full trajectory and like how like what those milestones are looking like. But to your point, yeah, if I was talking to like a potential customer, it's like, what people are investing in. The asset is short-term real estate debt. It's, you're investing in assets that are like between 6.5% to 12% yield in short term. And by short term, I mean between 6 to 12 months. And our average has been 11 months.
Pretty short term, yeah.
Yeah, and our max loan to value, which is kind of the best kind of risk proxy, is 75%, and our platform-wide average is 65%. So that means there's a 35% cushion of loss that could happen before it would impact your principal on the investment if you have a diversified portfolio across our platform. And so far, we've done between 750 to 800 million in origination volume now, and we've had zero losses. No one's lost a single dollar investing on the platform.
Wow.
There have been some interest that hasn't shown up for a couple of properties that we had to foreclose on, but they still made money on that on an overall investment. And ideally, you're well diversified across multiple investments.
Is this considered like a part of the fintech kind of like?
Absolutely, yeah.
Is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah, I often say fintech, and all my surfer buddies are like, "Sweet, get some free fins." Like, no, it's not.
I know you're big on fintech, and I follow you like on multiple social platforms, and I've seen like all your posts about kind of like just PeerStreet's growth, which is amazing. Like just keeping up with it, especially in the last year. And I know it's been about 4 years, right, since you launched. You said 2014.
That's when I left Google. Yeah, I guess we launched at the end of November 2014 is the first loan we did on the platform. Yeah, and then 2015 is when we October 2015 is when we opened to the public.
Yeah, let's call it 2015. So it's like not even 3 years, or almost 3 years. So you've seen a lot of growth since then, but it almost in some ways seems like you're just getting started because it's such a big industry and so many problems to solve. Definitely. Like, how do you see the next 5 to 10 years panning out for PeerStreet?
A couple of things. First of all, I'm incredibly bullish on where we can go as a business. That said, real estate is a cyclical market. In 5-10 years, typical cycles last like 9-10 years in real estate. So, that give or take 3 to 5 to 10 years, who knows? We'll see. And we've been on a bull run for quite a while now. So I don't necessarily see any downturn around the corner, but I do like. And the cycles are different. I do think that there'll be some probably cooling effects over time, but I think our platform's well designed to ride through that and potentially really take advantage of that on the other side of it. So I think there will be some massive opportunities for us going forward. But really, if that said, the thing I get really excited about with this business is there are a couple of things. There's the human side and like what we're doing for getting more borrowers access to more capital, and those guys are fixing up their communities and improving their neighborhoods one house at a time, and that whole thing. It's really amazing. They're creating local jobs, and it's kind of the American dream for a lot of people, and it really is. Meanwhile, investors are getting this asset class that they've never had access to, and like it's harder and harder to get yield anywhere. People are taking increased risks, and here we can provide them with what I believe is a relatively safe asset for them to invest in. And historically that's been the case with real estate. Even in down markets, by the way, like real estate as an asset tends to perform better than like even 08, even though that's kind of the poster child of the crisis. Equity markets got crushed during that. And so, so that's the thing. And so I think going forward, it's just there's a massive opportunity there. But the other thing that really excites me is this business is one where there's these incredible network effects that happen. And I recognized this early on, and as did a lot of people, but I'm increasingly getting really excited about the network effects, because I think we're basically on the precipice as a business, like in our trajectory. I think we're right at that stage where those start to kick in a very meaningful way. Yeah. And so what do I mean by that? Okay, so the average lender that we work with is like a small private lender. They have to they're not a bank. They have to raise their own capital to make loans, and it's very capital intensive. You're making like a $500,000 loan or $1 million loan, or our average is like a $400,000 loan, but that's it because we're in 45 states now, right? So so it's a capital intensive business. So if by having a secondary market, lenders can recycle their capital and make more loans to more borrowers. But when they were raising money on their own, they had very limited capital. It was not very flexible. So they couldn't do like a 15-year loan or something like that on a buy to rent property. We're now bringing on the types of investors. We built the business mostly on retail, and we'll always focus on retail and making sure that retail customers have access to this asset class. But it's important for us to bring diversity to our investor side too. So we now have over 6 institutions buying. Well, we have 6 institutions buying loans from us. We have many more in the hopper. So that's constantly going up now. And some of these guys in our hopper right now that are about to start buying from us are some of the largest loan buyers in the world, mortgage buyers in the world, I should say. And that allows, and they like short-term loans, they like 30-year loans, and they like everything in between. So what that allows us to do is bring on these buyers that will buy loans from our lenders that they could never originate before. But they're perfectly situated to do because they already have relationships with the borrower, they've already underwritten the property, the borrower's already performed on a higher payment with that loan. So it's all set up to basically start unlocking value for all these participants that are involved, let alone even non-participants. As I've said before, if you're in a neighborhood and there's a crummy house and someone goes in and fixes it up, turns it into a nice house, you didn't do anything and you benefited from that.
Right.
So that's what really excites me about where we're headed, because that's where things start. The scale of what we built starts to really unlock.
Yeah.
When do you have time to just not do PeerStreet? Like, what does Brett do for fun?
Yeah. So what I do for fun, the thing I do most for fun is surf.
Is that what happened to your?
No, this is mountain biking.
I see a bandage
That's the
on
other
your
thing
hand,
I do
so.
a lot for fun. I ride bikes, bicycles. I used to road bike a lot, and I used to race velodrome for a short period of time as well. I was never very good, but and that one gave me much bigger injuries than this, so that's why I stopped doing that. But no, I surf for fun. I work out pretty much every day. I either surf, run, do yoga, or go to this little high intensity interval training gym. And that, for me, it's really important because that helps clear my head.
Yeah.
But the thing I probably like doing most is hanging out with my kids and encouraging them to do those things and teaching them those things, like whether it be surfing or just soccer in the backyard or swimming the pool and chasing them around and stuff. That's great. And so I've tried to, it's really hard in the early days of doing a startup to have that kind of work-life balance, and I don't claim to have done a great job at that, but I am trying to do more of that and kind of establish a bit of that balance, especially as they're getting older now, later elementary school. So, I love doing that.
Hopefully future Trojans.
Hopefully future Trojans, but
maybe Stanford Cardinals.
or Stanford. Yeah, that would be honestly as a having done.
I don't hate Stanford. I don't hate Stanford.
No, me neither. My dad went to Stanford. My grandma went to Stanford. So.
Yeah.
And my dad, being a lifelong hater of USC, as soon as I got in, he was like, "You have to go to USC." So that was cool. He was a big supporter of that.
My future kids are just not. There's one school they just can't go to. I'm not gonna even mention it and give them. I mean, it's irrelevant. They just can't. They can go wherever they want.
Yeah.
Just not there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
My last question was before we're hanging out with beers here, and you had said that you'd never had Lagunitas IPA, and that's my favorite beer. What are your thoughts?
It's delicious. I think I've had it. I just look, there are very few IPAs I haven't had probably, but we drink we drink a decent amount of beer. Our old office space was right across from Simsey's, as I was mentioning to you guys before, downtown Manhattan Beach. And so, in fact, our conference room where we're recording this right now is called Simsey's, because it's a nod to that was where we spent a lot of time. That was kind of our office outside the office.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've definitely had this, but I'm a big fan of I love a lot of the El Segundo Brewing Company.
Yep.
And Three Weavers.
Three Weavers, I was about to say. That's a great one.
Our guy Dan Graham, head of underwriting, went to high school with one of the Weaver sisters. And then I've been drinking a lot of Modern Times recently out of San Diego.
Are you generally a beer guy, or is that your liquor of choice?
You know what's funny is it's become that since moving down to LA.
What was it up in NorCal?
It was all wine and spirits.
Napa area.
Yeah, but once
that's
it was
my
weird.
kind of thing. Yeah, that's my kind of thing.
Yeah, so it was interesting because in San Diego where we did Urchin, it was all Budweiser and Bud Light and like beach beers because you're on the beach and it's hot.
PBR.
A little PBR here and there, sure. Especially cycling. A lot of cyclists love PBR. And then moved up to Google, and everyone is like, no one drinks beer here. Everyone's drinking wine. And, it's because you're
They're classy. They're classy people.
They're much classier, exactly. And so it was that, plus you're right by Napa, et cetera. So, I started drinking and learning a lot more about wine. And so basically it came down to, when I was at Google, like during that phase of my life, I would drink basically three things. Coffee, water, and wine, and typically in that order.
It's the Holy Trinity.
It is.
And
it was great. And so I lived that way for quite a while. Actually, that was a kind of important rule to have because at Google, they, especially early Google, they had every kind of soda and stuff you'd never heard of, and like you would try stuff just to try it because they would have all kinds of stuff you'd never even heard of. And that becomes pretty dangerous quickly to your health. Yep. And so I was like, okay, I got to cut all that stuff out and just be focused and just kind of set some basic parameters. Otherwise, it's gonna be a problem.
Yeah.
And so
caffeine, H2O, and wine. That's
but then once I moved down here, Brew, my co-founder, he's really into beer and was into the whole microbrew thing, et cetera.
Is that is it a nickname or is that his?
It's his mom's maiden name was Brewster.
Okay.
So his name's actually Brewster.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks it's like some sort of fraternity, like beer related.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's what I thought it was.
I would have had to guess.
I was telling Pat on the way here, I was like, if my name was Brew, I would be in the beer business. Like, there's nothing else. I would I'm meant for it. You know?
Yeah.
It's like if my name is Salvatore Ferragamo, like, who's also a Trojan, by the way. You're gonna go into fashion. Like, it's my name is not in any of those things, but that's besides the point. But I think we've had a great time so far, and we're super excited to see what PeerStreet becomes, and what you do with this company, and we're so glad to have sat down with you and had this conversation.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to doing it again when we're like a little further along on the journey.
Part two.
Totally.
Thanks, Brett.
Love it.